Sulfur Keys, Britain's first urban waterside development, an internationally acclaimed success, where private companies have invested £350 million, where 10 years ago developers wanted to fill in these docks and build a car park, a place where people now live, work and play. Sulfur Keys was built by a few determined men of vision, just like their predecessors 100 years ago. Daniel Adamson dreamt up a canal 35 miles long, big enough to bring ocean-going liners into the heart of the Northwest, and with them came wealth and trade from across the world. 3,000 men worked the docks. It was said the streets were paved with gold. But the pattern of world trade changed. By the 1970s, Salford docks were closed. Derelict and idle, the jobs had gone. The cranes were silent. Filthy water, a once prosperous port abandoned, a forlorn legacy, or a challenge to build another bright new future. Clean water, new life. In 1985, the docks were relaunched as Sulfur Keys. Today, 3,500 people work here, more than the docks ever employed. Property values tripled in the first 10 years. 150 acres of land and water, home to some of the biggest companies in Britain. But it's for tomorrow's generation Salford are planning now. Pier 8, 10 acres of spectacular promontory for a landmark project to greet the Millennium. A multi-million-pound performing arts and entertainment complex. The Lowry Centre, a home for the world-famous Lowry collection, for international ballet, opera and theatre, and a unique place for children, a site that's at the heart of the Northwest. The links by road, air, rail and tram are already built or underway. 100 years after the ship canal secured wealth and prosperity for the region, Salford once again is setting out a vision for the future. The perfect location for a landmark development to secure jobs and investment for generations to come.
Itself that we find the inspiration for the ballet we're about to see. One of the most remarkable things about Lowry as a painter is that he seemed to have left behind him so much documentary material. There appear to have been endless interviews, and there are heaps of highly quotable lines. One of them provides the title for this ballet, A Simple Man. I'm a simple man, and I use simple materials, Lowry said of himself and his art. But as we shall see, L.S. Lowry was one of the most complicated simple men that ever was. For one thing, he lived a double life. For 42 years, he worked by day as a rent collector and by night as a painter. In the early days, and this is a Lowry self-portrait from those early days, the painting went on in the bedroom of the house where he lived with his parents. He built his life around his parents and spent it, as much as anything, searching for their approval of his work as an artist. Sadly, for Lowry, it never came. These are Lowry's own portraits of his mother and father. He lived with his parents throughout their lives. His father, Robert, who died in 1932, was an ordinary sort, a clerk in an estate agent's office, but his mother, Elizabeth, was altogether different. She was a keen pianist. In fact, the piano may have been the only true love of her life. She was a worshipper of respectability, and although rather delicate, she dominated her son's life. Elizabeth hadn't wanted children in the first place, And as her son grew up, she thought him ugly and awkward. He was a failure at school, and he was a failure in his mother's eyes. His wish to be an artist made it even worse. She openly despised his work and insisted that he get a proper job, at least for appearance's sake. For all that, he remained devoted to his mother and persevered with his painting, totally unrewarded. She was the focus of his life until she died in 1939 when Lowry was 51. He was inconsolable. Some said the loss almost drove him mad. Lowry spent the rest of his life alone, much of it in this rather grim stone house in a village just on the edge of the Peak District. It was his home from 1948 until his death in 1976. It was there, in a little back room, that he painted some of his greatest pictures. Although he never married, there were a number of young women whom Lowry helped and encouraged as painters. Some of these relationships are well documented. More interesting are the girls who were never clearly identified. This painting is called Portrait of Anne, but no one ever met her. Who could she have been? He spoke of a girl called Maud. Could this be a drawing of her? There were other pictures of girls discovered only after he died. Pictures that seemed to be born of frustration and repression. Was there ever a real model in Lowry's mind for these, or are they all part of one enormous fantasy? Or whoever the girls were, or might have been, Anne or Maud, they've never been tracked down. But the image always haunted him. The solitary figure, the man or woman alone or in some way disconnected from his surroundings, was an important theme for Lowry, particularly in his later career. He seemed to find some affinity with these odd, eccentric creatures. And while he clearly never despised them, either as individuals or as subjects, he had an ambivalent attitude towards them. To see them eating, to see him running to catch a train is funny beyond belief, he said. They all think they can do what they want, but they can't, you know. They're not free. No one is. Lowry was clearly moved, even inspired, by the hopeless and often helpless condition in which human beings find themselves. The emotion gets expression in another of the artist's themes, the sea. He was a regular visitor to Sunderland on the northeast coast. Looking out from his seaside hotel, he could indulge in his passion for the ocean. He claimed to have been fond of the sea all his life. Oh, it's the battle of life, he said. I sometimes think, what if it suddenly changed its mind and didn't turn the tide? If it didn't stop and just came on and on and on and on, that would be the end of it all. The same mood, I think, is present too in the industrial landscapes, the paintings of which L.S. Lowry is best known to most people. Many of the famous ones are here in the city of Salford Museum, which houses the biggest collection of his paintings in the world. Here you find the hallmarks of Lowry, the simple range of colors, the eerie white backgrounds and absence of shadows, the masses of people moving heads down across the canvas, the buildings rising above the people, dwarfing and dominating them. Even though he hardly painted an industrial scene throughout the last 20 years of his life, paintings like this still provide our strongest impressions of the artist and his work.